Welcome to the channel, Slavery of Shadows. They still speak in hushed tones about that night in the 1830s when three women decided they had endured enough. Adira, the quiet strategist whose eyes held secrets like hidden doors. Leora, the warrior who bore the scars of the whip upon her flesh. Zora, the grieving mother whose child never saw the morning light. This was no ordinary farm. It was a place where suffering was cultivated. Keys dangled from belts of the wealthy. Infants were assigned prices like livestock. And then the fire doors were unlocked. Footsteps fell soft as whispered prayers, and the masters never stirred from their sleep. By sunrise, the entire South was hunting them. Silus Thorne, the cold-blooded tracker, demanded their heads. But the swamp hoards its mysteries, and these women had learned to forge their grief into deadly instruments. You will feel pity for them. You will know fear because of them. You will question what justice truly means when the law itself is a whip. Because when Adira, Leora, and Zora finally confront Thorne, the question is no longer about mere survival. It is about what kind of world will emerge from the furnace of their fury. Before we proceed further, share in the comments where you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's story is one you absolutely cannot afford to miss. The merciless sun blazed high in a sky devoid of clouds, casting sharp shadows across the cotton fields of the breeding farm. Adira's hands worked automatically through the cotton plants. But her thoughts were elsewhere, tracking the intervals between overseer patrols. 20 strides to the water barrel, 15 minutes until the next sweep. Her sharp eyes catalog every motion, every routine, storing each detail like precious strands in a tapestry of endurance. 30 paces to her left, Zora struggled to maintain the rhythm. Her body still weakened from childbirth just days earlier. Her movements were labored, careful, each bend causing her face to contort with pain. Nearby, the overseer's whip cracked, making her recoil. Dark sweat patches spread across her dress, and her breathing came in short, ragged bursts. Leora worked the row between them, her silence more menacing than any approaching storm. The thick scars encircling her wrists caught the sunlight. Permanent, he snorts marks, from the time she had dared to resist. Yet her hands never ceased their motion, pulling cotton with machine-like precision, though her eyes blazed with scarcely contained rage. Pick up the pace. The overseer's voice thundered across the field. You lazy creatures aren't earning your keep. Adira observed him from the corner of her vision. Samuel Drake, newly arrived at the farm, but already infamous for his brutality. He swaggered as he walked, his whip twirling like an extension of his own arm. She noticed how he favored his left leg, how he took extended breaks in the shade of the old oak tree. Every vulnerability, every pattern, she committed them all to memory. Please, Zora breathed, staggering slightly.
I need water. Quiet!
Adira whispered back, her voice low. Drake is watching. 3 more minutes until he does his rounds in the north field. The sun climbed higher, making the air thick and heavy around them. Other women toiled in the endless rows, their bodies bent like withered stalks. Some bore the same rounded heaviness that Zora had carried just days before. Evidence of the farm's true purpose. The breeding farm's notoriety extended across 3 counties. Its operations were conducted with the cold efficiency of a livestock auction. A sharp cry cut through the air from the direction of the main house. Another birth, another soul brought into captivity. Leora's hands paused briefly, her knuckles whitening around the cotton she gripped. One day, she breathed so quietly only Adira could hear. They'll be the ones crying. The day stretched on, punctuated by the overseer's shouts and the swaying motion of exhausted bodies. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of crimson and amber, the women made their way back to the slave quarters. Zora could barely walk, leaning heavily on Adira's supporting arm. That evening, as darkness settled over the farm, Zora's baby took a turn for the worse. The infant's breathing became shallow, his tiny body burning with fever. Zora cradled him, offering soft liabs between her tears, while Adira attempted to cool his head with damp cloths. Leora paced the cramped space like a caged animal, her shadow dancing on the walls in the faint glow of their single candle. Near midnight, the baby's struggles ceased. His small body fell still in his mother's arms, and Zora's anguished cry echoed through the quarters. The sound drew the night guard, who burst in with Drake close behind. "What's all this commotion?" Drake demanded, his features twisted with irritation. "My baby," Zora sobbed, clutching the tiny bundle.
My baby is gone.
Drake's laughter was cruel, reverberating in the confined space. "Well, isn't that a pity? I suppose we'll need to reassign you sooner than planned. Can't have you occupying space without producing." Leora stepped forward, but Adira's hand shot out, gripping her arm firmly. The look exchange between them carried years of shared suffering and fury. "Master Thompson already has a buyer lined up," Drake continued, seemingly relishing Zora's grief. "A big man from Georgia who likes them young and fertile. Might be just what you need to get over this unfortunate incident." He kicked the edge of Zora's skirt before turning away, the night guard following with a snicker. When their footsteps faded, Adira moved to Zora's side, wrapping her arms around the grieving mother. Leora stood rigid by the door, her voice tight with rage. "They treat us worse than their dogs, greeting us like animals, selling our babies, mocking our pain." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the worn roof. The sound intensified, drumming above them like nature's own fury. In the dim light, Adira could see tears streaming down Zora's face as she rocked back and forth, her empty arms crossed over her chest. "We can't let them take you to Georgia," Leora said, her voice barely audible above the rain. "We can't let them do this anymore." Adira remained silent, her mind working as it did in the fields, calculating, measuring, weighing possibilities. The rain grew heavier, creating a curtain of sound that would conceal their words. Perfect for conspiring, perfect for scheming. They drew closer together, three women bound by pain and resolve. The candle light cast their shadows large against the wall, making them appear greater than their circumstances. Zora's tears slowed, replaced by something harder in her eyes. Leora's fury simmered like a pot on the verge of boiling over, and Adira, her voice steady and certain, finally spoke. "Tomorrow night, we move." The rain continued its relentless assault. Nature's own accomplice, keeping their whispered conspiracies hidden in the darkness. Dawn crept across the breeding farm like a guilty secret, painting the sky in shades of gray. Adira was already awake, had been for hours, standing near the doorway of the slave quarters. Her eyes tracked the guards' changing shifts, noting each detail with precision. Guard Thompson, the master's cousin, always began his morning rounds 5 minutes late, pausing to smoke his pipe behind the storage shed. Young Billy, barely 16, but already as cruel as his elders, patrolled the eastern fence with a slight limp from a horse kick. Every vulnerability, every pattern. Adira collected them like precious coins. Through the thin walls, she heard Leora's quiet movements, the scraping sound barely audible. Metal against metal, transforming broken tools into weapons. They had been gathering pieces for weeks. A broken plow blade here, a discarded nail there. Small items easily overlooked in daily counts. Zora moved through her morning tasks like a ghost, her face carefully blank as she carried water to the main house. But Adira saw how her eyes lingered on the ring of keys at Mrs. Thompson's waist. How she noted which key opened which door. Even in her grief, Zora's mind worked like theirs, mapping every possible path to freedom. "Girl!" The shout made Adira flinch. Overseer Drake stood in the yard, already sweating in the morning heat. "Get to the washing. Those sheets won't clean themselves." Adira kept her eyes down as she hurried to the washing area, but her mind never stopped working. The washing shed sat between the main house and the overseer's quarters, perfect for observing both buildings as she scrubbed sheets in the harsh lye soap. She counted footsteps, measured distance, noted patterns. Mid-morning brought Leora to the washing shed, carrying a bundle of dirty clothes. As she dropped them beside Adira, something metal clinked softly between them. A needle-sharp point glinted briefly before disappearing under the laundry, sharp enough to slice through butter. Leora whispered, her voice barely a breath. "Made 3 more last night." Adira nodded slightly, keeping her movement steady and unremarkable. The night guard drinks heavily on Thursdays. Sleeps at his post by midnight. They worked in silence after that, the rhythmic sound of washing covering any chance of being overheard. Around them, the farm continued its cruel daily dance. New girls were brought in from other plantations, their terror-filled eyes taking in the breeding pens. Older women, no longer deemed useful, were led away in chains. Near noon, Zora appeared with water for the washing women. Her face remained carefully blank, but her fingers brushed Adira's arm in a deliberate pattern as she passed the dipper. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. Their signal that she had information to share. They didn't dare speak more. Years of survival had taught them the danger of trust. Other slaves might break under questioning, might trade information for better treatment. Their plan could only survive in whispers between the 3 of them. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth and drawing sweat from every pore. Adira's hands were raw from the lye soap, but she kept washing, kept watching. She observed how the guard at the main gate dozed in the afternoon heat, how the dogs were fed at dusk, making them sluggish in the early evening hours. Evening brought the rough bread and thin soup that passed for dinner. The women ate in the yard, supervisors watching to ensure no one took extra portions. Overseers gathered near the porch, their loud voices carrying clearly in the evening air. "That new batch from Carolina's promising," Drake said, tearing into a chicken leg. "Young. Strong-built should breed well." Speaking of breeding, another overseer called out. "Got that arrangement sorted for the one who lost her pup." He jerked his head toward Zora. Drake's laugh was ugly. "George man's paying top dollar. Says he's got a special touch with the difficult ones." The other overseers joined in his laughter, the sound like grinding stones. Adira felt Leora tense beside her, could almost hear her teeth grinding. Under the cover of darkness, she pressed her foot against Leora's, a silent reminder to stay calm. Across the yard, Zora continued eating, her face a mask of submission. But when she looked up, her eyes met theirs, and in that glance past years of shared pain transformed into iron determination. They had made their pact in whispers and touches, in shared looks and silent understanding. No words were needed. They had survived too much together to need them now. Their bond was forged in blood and loss, stronger than any oath spoken aloud. The moon rose full and bright, casting silver shadows across the farm. In the women's quarters, the usual sounds of night settled in. Quiet crying, whispered prayers, the rustle of bodies trying to find comfort on hard pallets. But 3 women lay awake, their eyes open in the darkness. Adira counted the guards' footsteps as they passed. 12 steps, pause, turn, 8 steps to the corner. The night air carried the sound of boots on packed earth, growing fainter as the patrol moved away beside her. Leora's breathing was carefully controlled, her body coiled tight as a spring. The makeshift weapons were hidden in the straw of her pallet. their edges hungry for blood. Zora lay still as death on her pallet, her empty arms crossed over her chest. The memory of her baby's weight still haunted her. But tonight, that pain had crystallized into something harder, something dangerous. They listened as the night guard made his rounds, his footsteps growing distant. Beyond the walls, crickets sang their endless song. The moon climbed higher, casting bars of silver light through the cracks in the walls. In the distance, a dog barked once, then fell silent. The women remained awake, 3 separate hearts beating in terrible unison, waiting for tomorrow's night to fall. The moon hung full and cruel in the midnight sky as 3 shadows slipped from the slave quarters. Their feet, calloused from years of labor, moved silently across packed earth. Adira led the way, stolen keys clutched tight in her trembling hands. Each step had been planned, rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. Behind her, Leora's fingers curled around her makeshift blade. A broken plow piece honed sharp against stones. Her breath came in quiet huffs like a predator scenting blood. Zora brought up the rear torch, unlit but ready. Her movement steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. They paused at the corner of the building. Adira held up her hand, listening. From the stables came the sound of drunken humming. Overseer Drake, right where they knew he'd be, deep in his Thursday night whiskey. The women exchanged glances in the darkness. No words were needed. Leora moved first, her bare feet silent on the dirt. The stable door creaked softly as she eased it open. Drake sat on an upturned bucket, bottle dangling from his fingers. He barely had time to look up before Leora was on him. One hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his startled cry. The other drove the blade up under his ribs. His eyes went wide with shock. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not by their hands. But it was. Leora twisted the blade, feeling hot blood pour over her fingers. His struggles grew weaker, then stopped. "Quick now," Adira whispered. Though it wasn't necessary. They dragged Drake's body behind a stack of hay bales. Zora's hands shook as she struck flint to steel, lighting the torch. Its flame cast dancing shadows on the stable walls. The breeding shed stood dark and terrible against the star-filled sky. How many women had suffered within its walls? How many children, born into chains torn from their mother's arms? Zora's empty arms ached with remembered loss. They moved like ghosts across the yard. Adira's keys opened the shed's heavy lock. Inside, the torchlight revealed empty chains hanging from walls, straw pallets stained with old blood. Memories of pain lived in every shadow. Zora touched the torch to a pile of straw. Flames leaped hungry into darkness. They fed the fire with blankets, with wooden pallets, with everything that would burn. Soon the whole shed blazed, casting orange light across the farmyard. "The house," Adira breathed. Before they wake, they ran through shadows to the main house. Adira's hands trembled as she fitted key after key until the lock turned. The door swung open on silent hinges. Inside the house slept in wealthy comfort. Plush carpets muffled their steps. Fine furniture cast strange shadows in the darkness. Somewhere upstairs, a child coughed in sleep. Lee gripped her blade tighter. "I'll take the master. I'll handle the missus," Adira said, producing another sharpened metal shard from her dress. Zora nodded, torch held high. "I'll make sure none escape." They split up, moving through the house like avenging spirits. Leora took the stairs 2 at a time, finding the master's bedroom door. Inside, she could hear his heavy breathing. The door wasn't even locked. He'd never imagined his property would dare enter uninvited. The blade felt alive in her hand as she pushed the door open. Moonlight through gauzy curtains showed the master sprawled across his fine bed. His eyes opened as she approached, confusion turning to terror as he recognized her face. "You!" He started to shout, but Leora's blade silenced him. Blood sprayed across white sheets as she struck again and again. Years of rage guided her hand. Each strike avenged another woman's pain. Another child sold, another life destroyed. Down the hall, Adira cornered the mistress as she tried to flee. The woman's mouth opened in a scream that never came. Adira's blade found her throat with terrible precision. She watched the light fade from those cruel eyes that had watched so many mothers weep. Zora moved from room to room, torch held high. The flames caught curtains, furniture, fine carpets. Smoke began to fill the halls. When the children woke coughing, she felt her heart crack, but she remembered her own lost babies sold away or dead in chains. The cycle had to end. Screams finally split the night as fire consumed the house. Figures tried to flee, but found death waiting at every door. The women's blades showed no mercy. Blood soaked into expensive rugs. Flames devoured generations of stolen wealth. From the slave quarters came shouts of confusion, then awe. Slaves emerged to see their prison burning, their tormentors dying. Some ran for the woods, others stood watching, faces lit by the inferno. The overseers who came running met swift ends. Leora's blade found their hearts. Adira's carefully planned attack left no escape routes. Zora's torch turned their fine clothes into funeral purrs. Dawn wasn't far off when the killing ended. The farm burned like a beacon against the night sky. Years of cruelty cleansed in flame. Smoke rose thick and black toward heaven, carrying the ashes of an evil place. The three women stood in the yard. Blood spattered and smoke stained around them. The only sound was the crackle of flames. The breeding shed was nothing but glowing embers. The main house blazed like a fallen star. Leora spat on the blood-soaked ground, her blade still dripping. Her eyes reflected the flames, full of savage satisfaction. Years of rage had finally found release. Adira surveyed their work with grim calculation. The roads would soon be full of slave catchers. They had to move fast, had to disappear, before the sun revealed their deed to the world. "It's done," she said quietly. "No, we run." Pre-dawn mist rolled thick across the swamp's edge, clinging to the reeds like ghost fingers. Adira, Leora, and Zora pushed through the dense vegetation, their dresses heavy with blood and sweat. Their bare feet sank into mud with each desperate step. Behind them, dogs' barks echoed through the darkness. Still distant, but growing closer. "Keep moving," Adira whispered, helping Zora over a fallen log. The older woman's strength was failing after months of pregnancy and loss. But her eyes burned with determination. They had to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the burning farm. Leora brought up the rear, still gripping her bloody blade. Every few steps she'd turn, scanning the darkness behind them. Her shoulders were tense, ready to fight if the dogs got too close. The weapon had become part of her now, an extension of her fury. They reached the first stretch of water, black and still in the pre-dawn gloom. Spanish moss hung from cypress trees like burial shrouds. Somewhere in the darkness and all called. "We have to cross," Adira said, testing the depth with a stick. "The water will hide our scent." Zora hesitated at the water's edge. "The current is slow here," Adira assured her. "I've watched these waters for months. This is our best chance." They waded in carefully, the cold water rising past their knees, their waists. The mud sucked at their feet with each step. Insects buzzed around their faces. None of them spoke of what might lurk beneath the surface. Water moccasins, snapping turtles, or worse. Halfway across, the dogs' barking grew louder. Torch light flickered through the trees behind them. "Torch down," Adira hissed. They pressed themselves against a massive cypress trunk, submerged to their necks in the murky water. The tree's nose and exposed roots created a natural hiding place. They held perfectly still as voices carried across the water. "Tracks lead this way. Damn swamp water will hide their trail. Keep those dogs working. They won't get far. Zora's lips moved in silent prayer. Her eyes squeezed shut. Protect my boy, she mouthed. Keep Malik safe. Her son hidden away with trusted friends miles from the farm. Was there one secret hope? A child born free, never to know chains. Minutes crawled by like hours as the search party moved along the bank. The women barely breathed, letting the mist hide them. Finally, the voices and torchlight moved away, heading upstream. They'll split up to cover more ground. Adira whispered. We need to move now. They pushed on through deeper water, using cypress roots and low-hanging branches to pull themselves forward. The sky began to lighten, turning the mist pearl gray. Behind them, a column of smoke rose from the burning farm, staining the dawn sky black. As they finally reached the far bank, exhausted and shivering, a church bell began tolling in the distance. The sound carried clearly across the water, an alarm calling every white man for miles to hunt them down. News travels fast. Leora spat wringing water from her skirts. Good. Let them know what we did. Let them be afraid. Fear will make them cruel. Adira warned, helping Zora up the muddy bank. We need to find shelter before full light. In the growing dawn, they could see the town steeples rising above the trees, several miles away. Smoke from morning cook fires rose straight up in the still air. It looked peaceful, ordinary, but they knew better. Behind those neat white walls, terror and rage were spreading like wildfire. In town, Silus Thorne sat in the tavern, listening to the breathless accounts of survivors from outlying farms. His scarred hands clenched around his coffee cup as details emerged. The breeding farm destroyed, the masters and their families slaughtered. 3 slave women vanished into the swamp. He recognized the description of the women immediately. He'd been an overseer at that farm years ago before moving on to more profitable work as a slave catcher. He remembered Adira's quiet watchfulness, Leora's barely contained rage, Zora's gentle strength. He'd never imagined they'd dare something like this. I'll take the job, he announced, cutting through the tavern's anxious chatter. I know these women. I know how they think. He stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. I'll bring back their heads for half the usual fee. Meanwhile, deep in the swamp, the women found a small clearing screened by thick vegetation. They collapsed onto the damp ground, muscles trembling from exhaustion. Their clothes were torn and muddy, still stained with their oppressor's blood. Zora leaned against a tree trunk, her face drawn with fatigue. We need to rest just for a moment, Adira agreed. Though her eyes never stopped scanning their surroundings, she could still hear distant dogs, the search spreading out in all directions. Leora paced the clearing's edge, unable to rest. The blade was still in her hand, edge dulled with dried blood. We should keep moving. They'll have trackers out by now. We will, Adira said. But we need our strength. We're no good to anyone if we collapse in the open. She looked at each of her companions in turn, her voice low and serious. They will come and they will not stop. As the morning sun filtered through the cypress canopy, casting dappled shadows across their faces, birds began their morning songs, seemingly unaware of the horror and violence that had birthed this new day. In the distance, the church bell kept tolling its warning, calling for their blood. Midday brought suffocating heat to the swamp. The sun filtered through cypress branches, creating a muggy greenhouse effect that had the women's clothes sticking to their skin. They'd found a small rise of relatively dry ground, surrounded by stagnant pools and thick vegetation. Adira tore strips from her petticoat, using them to bind a deep cut on Leora's arm. The wound had come from their escape when Leora had caught herself on a nail while climbing through the stables. Hold still, Adira muttered, pulling the makeshift bandage tight. Leora winced but didn't complain. She kept her eyes on the surrounding trees, watching for movement. Her stolen blade lay within easy reach. It's not deep. Zora knelt by one of the clearer pools, using cupped hands to drink the murky water. Flies buzzed around her face, and she occasionally swatted them away. The water tasted of earth and rotting leaves, but her parched throat demanded relief. "We need better water soon," she said, wiping her mouth. "I'll scout ahead," Adira said, finishing with Leora's bandage. "There must be fresher springs deeper in," she stood, stretching her aching muscles. The morning's desperate flight had left them all sore and exhausted. "Leora, can you set up some protection while I'm gone?" Leora nodded, already gathering fallen branches. "I know a few tricks. Trip lines mostly. Might slow them down if they get close." Her hands worked quickly, stripping bark into tough cords. "Be careful," Zora called as Adira prepared to leave. "The spirits are restless today." She'd always had a sense for danger, what she called the whispers of ancestors watching over them. Adira moved carefully through the swamp, marking her path with subtle signs only she and her companions would recognize. A broken reed here, a twisted vine there. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Hidden sinkholes lurked beneath innocent-looking mud, and thorny vines seemed to reach for her like grasping hands. After an hour of careful navigation, she found what she was looking for, a natural spring bubbling up from limestone. Its water clear and sweet. She memorized the route, noting landmarks. On her return journey, she discovered several patches of edible plants, cattails with starchy roots, wild berries, even some mushrooms she recognized as safe. Back at their temporary camp, Leora had been busy. Simple but effective traps surrounded their position. Strings tied at ankle height, loose branches balanced to fall with a crash if disturbed. "Not much," she admitted, "but it'll give us warning at least." Zora sat with her back against a cypress trunk, her eyes distant, her hands absently twisting a piece of Spanish moss, weaving it into patterns. "Malik would be 7 now," she said softly. "Old enough to help in the kitchen, they'd say. Old enough to learn submission." The other women fell silent. They all knew about Malik, Zora's youngest and only surviving child, spirited away as an infant by sympathetic house slaves. He lived free, hidden with allies many miles away, never knowing his mother, except through secret messages and prayers. "Hell never wear chains," Leora said fiercely. "We'll make sure of that." Meanwhile, in the town square, Silus Thorne addressed his hastily gathered pause. 24 men armed with rifles and dogs listened as he outlined his strategy. His scarred face twisted with contempt as he spoke. "These women think they're clever," he said, checking his pistols. "They'll stick to the deep swamp, use the water to hide their trail, but I know they're kind. Pride will make them reckless. They'll need supplies, shelter." He spat tobacco juice onto the dusty ground. "I've tracked worse through worse. We'll have them before the week's out." As dusk approached, the women moved carefully through darkening woods. Adira had spotted a trapper's cabin earlier, isolated and poorly defended. Now they watched it from the shadows, waiting for their moment. The cabin's lone occupant stepped outside to check his smokehouse. Leora moved first, silent as a shadow. Her blade caught moonlight as she pressed it against the man's throat. "Not a sound," she whispered. They took what they needed: blankets, dried meat, a tinder box, and most precious of all, a water skin. Adira found a small bag of cornmeal, while Zora discovered hooks and line for fishing. They worked quickly, efficiently, leaving the trapper tied but unharmed. "Remember our faces," Leora told him as they left. "Tell them what we took. Tell them we're not afraid." Deeper in the swamp, they finally allowed themselves the luxury of a small fire. Carefully screened by vegetation, the flames cast dancing shadows on their tired faces as they huddled close. Sharing their first real meal, since their escape. The dried meat was tough but filling. They passed the water skin between them, each taking careful sips. The fire's warmth seemed to ease some of their exhaustion, though they remained alert to every sound in the darkness. "We could keep running," Zora said quietly, staring into the flames. "Find our way north, maybe." Leora shook her head. "They'd never stop hunting us, and others would suffer for our escape." Adira poked the fire with a stick, sending sparks swirling up into the night. Her face was set with determination as she spoke. "We will not just run," she said. "We will strike." Dawn crept through the swamp like a timid creature. Mist clung to the ground, turning tree trunks into ghostly pillars. Adira, Leora, and Zora moved silently through the fog, their feet finding purchase on roots and firm ground with practiced care. They heard the patrol before they saw it. Boots squelching in mud, frustrated curses at the terrain, dogs whining at lost scent. The women pressed themselves against a large cypress, watching through gaps in the Spanish moss. "Spread out," ordered a gruff voice. "They can't be far. Check every hollow tree, every deep pool." 6 men moved through the mist, rifles ready. 2 held straining dogs on leather leashes. Their confidence was obvious in their careless steps and loud voices. They thought themselves the hunters. Adira caught Leora's eye and made a subtle gesture. Leora nodded, understanding the silent command. They had prepared for this during the night, setting subtle traps throughout their chosen territory. Now it was time to use them. Zora pressed her hand against the cypress bark, her lips moving in silent prayer. The spirits of the swamp seemed to answer. A sudden breeze stirred the mist, concealing their movements as they split up. The patrol continued forward, unaware of the danger. The first trap was simple but effective. A tripwire of tough vines stretched between trees. When the lead man stumbled, his rifle discharged into the air. Birds exploded from the canopy, their wings adding to the confusion. "What the hell?" Another guard stepped backward, right into a patch of seemingly solid ground. The carefully concealed pit swallowed his leg to the knee. His scream echoed through the trees. The dogs went wild, pulling against their leashes in different directions. The mist made it impossible to tell where the attacks came from. Shadows seemed to move on all sides. Leora struck first, emerging from behind a fallen log. Her blade opened the nearest guard's throat before he could raise his rifle. She disappeared again into the fog as his body fell. "They're here!" someone shouted. "Form up! Form up!" Adira's throw knife found his chest. The remaining guards fired blindly into the mist, their shots harmless against ghosts. One of the dog handlers turned to run. Zora rose from behind a curtain of moss, wielding a heavy branch. The sickening crack of wood against skull silenced his retreat. The last 2 guards stood back to back, their rifles shaking. "Devils," one whispered. "Which women worse?" Leora's voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "We are justice." The attack was swift and brutal. When silence returned to the swamp, only the women remained standing. The dogs had fled, their leashes trailing behind them. Leora cleaned her blade on a dead man's shirt, her movements precise and practiced. "They'll find them soon enough," she said. "Let them see what happens to those who hunt us." Adira searched the bodies, taking ammunition and supplies. "Word will spread," she said. These weren't just any guards. They were Thorne's men. "He'll take this personally." "Good," Leora replied, her grin fierce in the growing light. "Let him come." They moved quickly away from the scene, using their knowledge of the terrain to confuse any trail. By mid-morning, they had reached one of their hidden camps, a shallow cave formed by fallen trees and earth. Zora sat apart from the others, her face troubled. In her hands, she held a small piece of cloth, a baby's swaddling blanket she'd kept hidden through their escape. "Malik," she whispered. touching the fabric to her cheek. "My son." Adira approached quietly, sitting beside her. "He's safe," she reminded Zora. "The people hiding him are clever. Thorne will never find him, but he doesn't know me." Zora's voice cracked. All these years just whispered messages and prayers. What kind of mother leaves her child? "A mother who wants him to live free," Leora said firmly, joining them. "Every blow we strike weakens their power. Every man we kill makes the world safer for him." Throughout the day, they heard distant shouts and gunfire as more patrols searched the swamp, but none came close to their hideout. The women used the time to rest, tend their weapons, and plan. By afternoon, they caught fragments of conversation from passing searchers. The words made them smile. "Fire women." They're calling them like spirits appearing from nowhere. "Burned the breeding farm. Killed the masters." The whispers spread through the swamp like smoke, reaching the ears of enslaved workers in nearby fields. Field hands exchanged meaningful glances. House slaves passed messages in coded words. The story grew with each telling. 3 women who had turned their chains into weapons, who had burned their prison and escaped into legend. As evening approached, they prepared to move again. The cave had served its purpose, but staying too long in one place was dangerous. They gathered their few possessions, erasing all signs of their presence. Leora checked her blade one final time. The metal still stained despite her cleaning. Her eyes gleamed with satisfaction as she remembered the morning's battle. "They think they hunt us," she said, her voice full of dark promise. "But we are the hunters." The mist was returning as they slipped away from their temporary shelter. But now it felt like an alley rather than an obstacle. They had learned to use the swamp's dangers as weapons to turn the wilderness into their fortress. Behind them, in the growing darkness, the bodies of Thorne's men lay as a message. The wilderness might hold monsters, but they weren't the beasts men should fear. The real terror came from those who had nothing left to lose, who had transformed their pain into purpose. The 3 women moved like shadows through the gathering dusk, their feet sure on the treacherous ground. They were no longer just escapes. They had become something else, a nightmare for those who had thought themselves masters, a whispered hope for those still in chains. Shadows lengthened across the cane field as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Adira, Leora, and Zora lay flat against the warm earth, watching the Whitfield plantation house through the tall stalks. The sweet smell of crushed sugar filled their nostrils as they crawled forward inch by careful inch. On the wide plantation porch, 4 overseers lounged in rocking chairs, their laughter carrying across the field. Empty bottles littered the wooden boards at their feet. A 5th man stumbled out through the screen door, carrying fresh drinks. "Look at them," Leora whispered, her fingers tightening around her knife handle, celebrating while others suffer. Adira studied the scene with calculating eyes. 5 on the porch, 2 more by the slave quarters, another watching the storage barn. She pointed to each position. The master's away, only his son drinking with the overseers. Zora shifted beside them, her gaze moving to the slave quarters, where women hung washing in the dying light. Children darted between the lines of clothes, their play subdued and watchful. "So many," she murmured. "Can we protect them all?" "We'll give them the chance to run," Adira replied. "That's all we can offer." They waited as the sky darkened to purple. The overseers grew louder, their words slurring. Oil lamps flickered to life on the porch, creating pools of yellow light. In the quarters, families gathered for their major evening meals. Leora's patience wore thin. Now she hissed while they're drunk and stupid. Adira held up her hand, watching the guard rotation. When the barn watchman turned his back, she nodded. "Move." They slipped through the cane like spirits, their dark clothes blending with growing shadows. The women had learned to step without sound, to move like wind through leaves. Reaching the edge of the field, they split up. Adira toward the quarters, Leora to the porch, Zora circling behind the barn. The first overseer died without a sound. Leora's blade opened his throat as he relieved himself against a tree. His blood watered the roots as she eased his body down near the quarters. Adira caught the eye of an old woman hanging sheets. A subtle gesture passed between them, the underground language of the enslaved. The woman casually moved inside, whispering urgent warnings. Zora reached the barn first. The guard never saw her coming. She used a gar of twisted cloth, dropping his body behind empty barrels on the porch. The remaining overseers roared with laughter at some crude joke. The master's son stood unsteadily, announcing his need for more whiskey. He stumbled through the door just as Leora mounted the steps. "Evening, gentlemen," she said softly. They turned, alcohol-soaked mind slow to recognize danger. By then, her blade was already moving. The chaos erupted like a thunderstorm. Screams split the night. 2 overseers died where they sat, throats open to the stars. Another managed to draw his pistol, but the shot went wild as Leora drove her knife into his chest. The last overseer ran, boots pounding across the porch boards. He made it 3 steps before Adira's thrown blade found his back. He pitched forward into the dirt. Inside the house, the master's son was screaming for help. Leora kicked in the door, her blade dripping red in the lamplight. His final prayers went unanswered. Meanwhile, the quarters erupted with activity. Men and women who had waited years for this moment seized their chance. They poured out into the night, some running for freedom, others turning to fight. Rocks and tools became weapons in willing hands. "The barn," Zora shouted. "Burn it all." Torches appeared as if by magic. The dry wood of the storage barn caught quickly, flames reaching for the sky. Someone started singing, an old spiritual with new words about vengeance and freedom. More buildings began to burn. The cooking house, the equipment shed, the overseer's quarters. Fire painted the night in shades of orange and red. Adira organized the chaos, directing people toward the swamp paths she knew were safe. "Stay together," she ordered. "Help the children and elderly. Don't stop until you reach the free settlement." Some of the newly freed chose to stay and fight. A young man named Elias approached the women, speaking for several others. "We want to join you," he said. "Teach us to hunt them like you do." Leora grinned, clapping him on the shoulder. "Welcome to the army of the night, brother." They gathered in the cane field as the plantation burned behind them. Someone had found the master's store of whiskey, and bottles passed from hand to hand. Women hugged and cried. Children stared at the flames with wide eyes, too stunned to be afraid. "Freedom," an old man whispered, tasting the word like sweet water. "Freedom." Zora led them in a prayer of thanksgiving, her voice strong and clear above the crackling flames. Others joined in, their words a hymn of defiance and hope. But Adira couldn't Clear's throat celebrate. She watched the darkness beyond the fire's light, knowing their victory would bring swift response. "We need to move," she said finally. "Dawn's coming." They separated into groups, taking different paths into the swamp. The women made sure each group had a guide who knew the safe routes, the secret ways through water and wilderness. As the first hint of gray touched the eastern sky, Adira, Leora, and Zora melted back into the swamp's embrace. Behind them, smoke rose from the ruins of Whitfield Plantation. The air smelled of ash and possibility. Later that morning, Silus Thorne's horse picked its way through the destruction. He dismounted by the burned porch, studying the overseers' bodies with cold eyes. Kneeling, he traced a finger through blood dried black in the dirt. "I'll drag their corpses through the dirt." He promised the empty air, his voice flat with certainty. But the women were already far away, leading their growing band of followers deeper into the swamp's dark heart. In the fading light of evening, a hidden camp nestled deep in the swamp buzzed with quiet activity. Freed men and women moved between makeshift shelters, speaking in hushed tones. The air was thick with mosquitoes and the sweet rot of vegetation. Zora sat apart from the others, perched on a fallen cypress log. Her fingers traced the edges of a small cloth scrap, a piece of Malik's baby blanket she'd kept close since leaving him. The familiar texture brought both comfort and pain. Softly she hummed an old Libby, the same one she'd sung to him as an infant. Nearby, Adira cleaned her knife while watching the newcomers from the Whitfield plantation settle in. Some still bore marks of chains, their ankles raw and bleeding. Others showed older scars, testimony to years of brutality. She cataloged each face, memorizing who could fight, who needed protection. Leora paced the camp's edge like a caged panther, her energy barely contained. The raid's success had only sharpened her hunger for more action. "We should hit the Maxwell place next," she said, pausing near Adira. "Their defenses are weak. We need to rest." Adira replied without looking up. "Let the heat die down." "Heat?" Leora scoffed. "They're already hunting us. Might as well give them something to chase." Their argument was interrupted by Elias, one of the men from Whitfield, crashing through the undergrowth. His face was streaked with sweat, eyes wide with panic. "Riders coming," he gasped. "Not here, but news from town." The camp erupted in frightened whispers. Adira stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. "What news?" Elias caught his breath, looking at Zora with pained eyes. "It's Silus Thorne. He took. He swallowed hard. He has the boy Malik." The Libby died on Zora's lips. The scrap of cloth slipped from her numb fingers into the mud. For a moment, she sat perfectly still as if turning to stone. "How?" Adira demanded. But Elias shook his head. "Don't know, but Thorne's bragging about it in town. Says he'll trade the boy for surrender." Zora's wail of anguish shattered the evening quiet. Birds took flight from nearby trees. She collapsed forward, her body racked with sobs. "My boy. My baby boy." Leora cursed viciously, kicking a water bucket. It spilled across the ground, dark liquid seeping into the earth. "I'll gut him," she snarled. "I'll cut him apart while he breathes." But Adira watched Zora with growing alarm. The mother's grief was transforming into something else. Resignation. "No," Adira said, reading the defeat in Zora's shoulders. "Don't even think it. I have to." Zora's voice was hollow. "He has my son. If you surrender, they'll kill you both anyway." Adira argued, kneeling beside her friend. "You know that he's just a child." Zora shot back, her eyes wild. "My child. What mother wouldn't trade her life?" The camp had gone silent. Everyone watching the three women, the freed people, recognized the impossible choice. Safety versus sacrifice. Survival versus love. It was a decision they'd all faced in different ways. Leora grabbed Zora's shoulders, forcing her to look up. "You surrender, you die for nothing. We can fight, we can get him back." "How?" Zora's question came out like a plea. Elias cleared his throat. "There's more. Thorne setting up in the old trading post deep in the swamp. Got about 20 men. They're expecting you to come in from the north, following the main water path." Adira's mind was already working, calculating angles and options. "Then we don't come from the north." "You're not listening." Zora pushed away from them both, stumbling to her feet. "This isn't about winning anymore. It's about my son, my baby." Her voice broke. "If Malik dies, all of this means nothing. So, we save him," Leora insisted. "But not by giving up. Never by giving up." The argument circled like vultures. Zora's determination to surrender hardened with each passing minute. Adira tried reason, then pleading. Leora's frustration built until she stormed off into the darkness, unable to watch her friend choose death. As night settled over the camp, the swamp's chorus of frogs and insects rose to a crescendo. Lantern light caught tears on Zora's cheeks as she whispered again. If Malik dies, all of this means nothing. The words hung in the humid air like Spanish moss, heavy with the weight of truth. Their hard-won unity, forged in blood and fire, was unraveling in the face of a mother's love and a hunter's cruel calculation. In his camp at the trading post, Silus Thorne allowed himself a small smile as he watched his men prepare. Malik lay curled in a makeshift cage, too terrified to make a sound. The boy was small for his age, dark eyes huge in his thin face. Perfect bait. Thorne had positioned shooters in the trees, hidden traps along the likely approach route. He knew these women knew their desperation would drive them to attempt a rescue. Let them come. He would end their legend in blood and chains. Restore proper order to a world they dared to challenge. But in the hidden camp, as darkness wrapped around them like a burial shroud, the three women who had dared so much found themselves at a crossroads. Their previous victories meant nothing now. The force that had driven their rebellion, love transformed into vengeful purpose, was the same force threatening to tear them apart. Zora clutched the fallen scrap of Malik's blanket, pressing it to her heart. Her whispered words carried a mother's agony. If Malik dies, all of this means nothing. Pre-dawn darkness cloaked the swamp camp in shadows. The air hung heavy with dread and determination. Adira knelt in a cleared patch of earth, using a broken stick to sketch crude maps in the dirt. Her movements were sharp, precise, each line drawn with calculated purpose. Nearby, Leora sat on a fallen log, the rhythmic scrape of stone against metal marking her presence. Her blade caught what little moonlight fluttered through the cypress canopy. The sharpening was methodical, almost hypnotic, but her eyes blazed with barely contained rage. Zora hadn't moved from her spot since hearing the news about Malik. Her quiet sobs had given way to silent tears that tracked down her cheeks. The scrap of blanket remained clutched in her trembling hands. "We can't just charge in," Adira said, breaking the tense silence. She pointed to her dirt map. "Thor knows these swamps. He'll have men here, here, and here." The stick marked decks in the soil, shooters in the trees, traps on the ground. "Then we kill them all," Leora growled, testing her blad's edge with her thumb, "and get Malik shot." Adira's voice was sharp. "Think Thorne expects desperation. He wants us charging straight into his guns." "While my son suffers," Zora whispered horrorously. Adira stood brushing dirt from her knees. "Listen to me, both of you. We didn't survive this long by being stupid. Thorne thinks he knows us, knows our pain, our rage." She looked at Leora. "But he forgets what else we learned on that farm." "What's that?" Leora asked, pausing her sharpening. "Patience." Adira's eyes gleamed in the darkness. "The art of waiting for the right moment. And we learned something else, too." She turned to the gathered runaways. "We learned we're not alone anymore." Elias stepped forward, followed by others from the Whitfield plantation. "What's the plan?" Adira crouched again by her map. "Thorne expects 3 desperate women. Instead, we'll give him chaos." Her stick traced new lines. "We start fires here, here, and here. The smoke will thick the air, blind his shooters. The swamp itself becomes our weapon." Understanding dawned on Leora's face, like when we burned the farm. "Exactly," Adira nodded. "But this time we have more hands, more minds." She looked at the gathered faces. "Some of you know these swamps better than Thorne ever could." An older man named Jacob spoke up. "There's sinkholes near the trading post, hidden under moss and mud. One wrong step. Perfect." Adira's stick marked more spots. "We'll guide them right into nature's traps. String vines between trees just above head height. In the smoke, They won't see them. The plan took shape as more voices joined in. Women who'd worked the swamp's edge knew where the ground was treacherous. Men who'd hidden from patrols pointed out blind spots in Thorne's likely defenses. Zora finally stirred, her voice rough from crying. But Malik will be safer in chaos than in a direct assault. Adira assured her. Thorne's men will be too busy saving themselves to watch one small boy. The camp burst into action. Some gathered dry tinder and pitch-soaked wood. Others wove vines into simple but effective traps. Small groups slipped out to dig hidden pits, covering them with fragile layers of branches and leaves. Leora organized the fighters, distributing what weapons they had. Knives, clubs, a few stolen pistols. Remember, she instructed, let the smoke and swamp do most of the work. Strike fast, then vanish. Make them think we're everywhere. The sky began to lighten, a faint gray glow seeping through the trees. The air grew thick with anticipation. Adira moved between groups, checking preparations, adjusting positions. Her calm demeanor steadied nerves, gave purpose to fear. Watch for the signal, she reminded everyone. 3 short bird calls means the fires start. Let the smoke build before anyone moves. Zora stood at last, tucking Malik's blanket scrap into her shirt close to her heart. I should be near the trading post, she said. When there's a chance to reach him, we'll be ready, Adira promised, gripping her friend's hand. But we do this smart. We do this together. The first rays of sun pierced the canopy, painting golden strips across the swamp's murky water. Birds began their morning songs, covering the sound of people moving into position. The air was already humid, promising another sweltering day. Through the trees they heard the approaching sood, men cursed at the difficult terrain. Metal clinked, guns and chains. Then came the sound they dreaded. Malik's small whimper as Thorne yanked him forward. Careful with our bait. Thorne's voice carried clearly. Their witch of a mother won't show if he's damaged too badly. Leora's hand clamped down on Zora's arm, stopping her instinctive lurch forward. The 3 women crouched in their hiding spot, watching through leaves as the paws came into view. Thorne led the way, one hand holding Malik's chain, the other resting on his pistol. The boy stumbled, feet dragging in the mud, but made no sound. Behind them came 20 men, their faces hard with purpose and prejudice. Rifles gleamed dully in the early light. The hunters moved deeper into the swamp. Unaware they were now the hunted, around them. Hidden in shadow and smoke, ready to rise, the true strength of the swamp waited for Adira's signal. Mid-morning sun filtered through the cypress trees, casting dappled shadows across the swamp. Thorne's men slogged through knee-deep muck, their boots making wet-sucking sounds with each step. Curses filled the humid air as they fought against the treacherous terrain. Keep moving, Thorne barked, yanking Malik's chain. The boy stumbled, his small feet catching on exposed roots. Fear made his movements jerky, uncertain. His eyes darted between the trees, searching for his mother. This is fool's work, one of the men grumbled, swatting at mosquitoes. Could be anywhere in this devil's swamp. They're here, Thorne said with cruel certainty. Watching us right now. I'd bet my life on it. He pulled Malik closer, using him as a shield. Aren't they, boy? Malik said nothing, but his lower lip trembled. Behind them, the posy spread out in a ragged line, rifles ready, sweat soaked through their shirts. Despite the morning hour, the swamp's stillness felt unnatural, threatening. Hidden in the shadows, Adira raised her hand. The signal passed silently through the trees. 3 short bird calls barely distinguishable from real swamp life. Dry tinder caught spark. Smoke began to rise from multiple points, thick and choking.
Troll fire!
Chor, someone shouted. Men turned, confused by the multiple sources. The smoke spread quickly in the still air, reducing visibility to mere feet. The first trap sprung with a sharp crack. A man screamed as the ground gave way beneath him, sending him plunging into a spiked pit. Before the others could react, more traps activated. Vines pulled tight across paths, catching men at neck height. More pits opened, swallowing horses and riders alike. "It's an ambush," Thorne shouted, dragging Malik behind a large cypress. "Form up, form up." But there was no forming up in the chaos. Flaming arrows strayed through the smoke, setting clothing ablaze. Men thrashed in panic, firing blindly into the smoke. Their shots went wild, splintering bark and kicking up mud. Leora burst from the shadows with a warrior's cry, her blade flashing. She caught two men completely by surprise, opening their throats before they could turn. Her movements were fluid, practiced, terrible in their efficiency. Blood sprayed across cypress trunks as she vanished back into the smoke. Left flank. Adira's voice carried clear command. "Drive them toward the sinkholes." The hidden rebels responded instantly, emerging from concealment to harry the P's left side. Men stumbled backward right into nature's trap. The seemingly solid ground dissolved beneath their feet, sucking them down into the swamp's hungry depths. Through it all, Malik remained Thorne's prisoner. The slave catcher fired his pistol one-handed, keeping the boy close with his other arm. "Come out and face me, witches," he bellowed, "or the boy dies here and now." A blur of motion answered his challenge. Zora appeared as if birthed from the smoke itself, her mother's fury giving her strength. She slammed into Thorne's side, breaking his grip on Malik. They tumbled together in the mud, wrestling for control of the pistol. "Run, Malik!" she screamed, fighting to keep Thorne pinned.
Run to Adira!
The boy hesitated only a moment before darting away. Thorne roared in rage, bringing his knee up into Zora's stomach. The pistol went off, the shot lost in the general chaos. Zora rolled away, gasping as Thorne struggled to his feet. More rebels emerged, wielding improvised weapons. They struck at the remaining POS members with hoes and cithatheras. Tools of labor turned to instruments of vengeance. The swamp's murky water ran red with blood. Fall back to high ground. Toward, but few were left to obey. Those still standing tried to retreat, only to find their path blocked by walls of fire and smoke. Unseen attackers picked them off one by one. Leora appeared again, her face strewn with blood and mud. She moved like a demon through the chaos, blade singing. Two more men fell to her fury before she melted back into the smoke. Her laugh, wild and terrible, echoed through the trees. Adira's voice continued calling out commands, coordinating the attack from multiple directions. The rebels moved with practiced precision, herding the surviving POS members into killing grounds. Years of quiet observation had taught them well. Now they were the ones giving orders, dealing death from the shadows. Bodies began to pile up in the mud, some face down in shallow water. Others sprawled across exposed roots. Horses thrashed in terror, adding to the confusion. The smoke grew thicker, stinging eyes and burning throats. Yet Thorne remained standing, his back against a massive cypress. His pistol had been reloaded, and he held a long knife in his other hand. His eyes darted between the shifting shadows, tracking movement. Whatever fear he felt was masked by pure hatred. "Come on then," he challenged the smoke. "Let's finish this. You want revenge? Come take it." Arrows hissed past him, thewing into the tree trunk. He didn't flinch. A thrown knife sliced his arm, drawing blood, but he barely seemed to notice. His focus was absolute, hunting for a clear shot at the women who had destroyed his reputation. "You think you've won?" he shouted. "You think this changes anything? There will be others after me, hundreds more. You'll never be free." The only answer was the crackle of flames and the moans of dying men. Thorne stood alone now among the carnage, his fine clothes soaked with swamp water and blood. His carefully laid trap had become his own nightmare, but still he refused to fall. Movement caught his eye. A shadow, a ripple in the smoke. His pistol snapped up, finger tightening on the trigger. But there were too many shadows, too many directions to watch. The swamp itself seemed to have come alive, hungry for his blood. Through the afternoon haze, smoke continued to curl over the swamp like ghostly fingers. Bodies lay scattered across the muck, some half submerged in murky water. Only Thorne and 3 of his men remained standing, their backs pressed against the massive cypress. "Seer," one man whispered, his voice cracking. "We should run while we can, coordinate," keeping his pistol trained on the shifting shadows. "You want to run? Go ahead. They'll cut you down before you make 10 steps. As if to prove his point, an arrow whistled through the smoke, taking the speaking man in the throat. He clutched at the shaft, eyes wide with shock, before toppling face first into the water. The remaining 2 men broke, terror finally overwhelming them. They splashed through the swamp in opposite directions. Leora's blade found one, emerging from behind a tree to open his belly. The other made it further, almost reaching solid ground before Adira's carefully placed trap caught his ankle. The snap of bone carried clearly through the humid air, followed by screams that quickly fell silent. Thorne stood alone now, exactly as the women had planned. His fine clothes were ruined, plastered to his body with mud and blood. Sweat ran down his face, despite the shade mixing with spatters of red. His eyes held a wild light, the look of a predator who suddenly realized he had become preyed. "Is this what you wanted?" He shouted at the smoke, "to die in this mess of mud, and because that's all you'll get. You're the only one dying today." Adira's voice came from somewhere to his left. Thorne spun, firing. The shot vanished into empty shadows. "We've been planning this since you first hunted our people." Leora called from the right. Another shot. Another miss. "Since you helped build that farm of horrors." Zora added from behind him. Thorne's head snapped around, but he couldn't track them through the haze. The women were moving constantly, their voices coming from new directions each time they spoke. They had learned this tactic from years of observation. How to disorient, how to confuse, how to strike from unexpected angles. That farm was mercy compared to what you deserve. Thorne snarled, trying to watch all directions at once. Animals need to be bred proper. Need to be controlled. We are not animals. Adira said, closer now. Thorne fired again, his shot kicking up mud where she had been a moment before. We are not property. Leora growled so near he could almost feel her breath. He slashed with his knife, cutting only air. We are mothers, Zora whispered right behind him. Thorne spun, but his boots slipped in the mud. He stumbled, catching himself against the cypress. That moment of imbalance was all they needed. The women emerged from 3 directions at once, converging on their tormentor like avenging spirits. Adira drove her shoulder into his chest, knocking him fully off his feet. The pistol flew from his grip, disappearing into the muck. Leora's blade slashed down, but Thorne managed to roll, taking only a shallow cut across his shoulder. He came up with his knife, leading, steel glinting dully in the filtered light. The blade caught Leora in the side as she pressed her attack, drawing a pained cry from her lips. First blood. Thorne grinned savagely, but his triumph was short-lived. Zora grabbed his knife arm from behind, while Adira kicked at his knee. They grappled in the shallow water. 4 bodies twisted together in a desperate struggle. Thorne fought like a cornered animal, all technique abandoned in favor of pure violence. His elbow caught Zora's temple, stunning her. He nearly broke free, but Adira's fingers found his eyes, digging deep. He howled, thrashing wildly. Leora, despite her wound, launched herself back into the fight. Her weight drove Thor face first into the water. He bucked up, throwing her off. But Adira and Zora were there to force him down again. Mud filled his mouth as he tried to scream. For every child torn from their mother, Zora hissed, pressing harder. For every woman's body you sold, Adira added, her voice cold with hate. For every drop of blood you spilled, Leora finished, ignoring the red spreading from her side. Together, they held him under the muck. Thorne's struggles grew weaker as the swamp slowly claimed him. Bubbles rose, then stopped. Still, they didn't let go, making sure there would be no last-minute escape. Only when the body went completely limp did they release their grip. The swamp's hungry mud began to pull Thor deeper, erasing him inch by inch. Soon there would be nothing left but a dark stain in the water. A child's scream pierced the silence. Malik stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes wide at the violence he had witnessed. Zora immediately splashed toward him, arms outstretched. "It's over, baby," she soothed, pulling him close. "It's over now. Look away." Malik buried his face in her shoulder, small body shaking with sobs. Zora held him tight, her own tears falling into his hair. After so long apart, after so much fear, they were finally together again. Adira moved to help Leora, who had slumped against a tree trunk. Blood seeped between the fingers pressed to her side, but her eyes were clear and focused. "Deep?" Adira asked, examining the wound. "Deep enough," Leora grimaced. "But I've had worse. Help me bind it." They worked quickly, using strips torn from relatively clean cloth to staunch the bleeding. The cut was serious, but had missed anything vital. With proper care, Leora would survive, though the scar would join many others on her body, each one a mark of defiance against those who had tried to break her. As they worked, silence settled over the swamp. The fires had burned low, leaving only wisps of smoke dancing between the trees. Bodies lay where they had fallen, some already settling into the mud. Nature would reclaim them all eventually, erasing the evidence of this day's violence. The three women stood together, battered but unbroken. Their clothes were soaked with water, mud, and blood, both their own and their enemies', but their eyes held neither defeat nor regret. They had done what was necessary, what justice demanded. Night settled over the swamp like a heavy blanket, bringing with it a chorus of insects and frogs. In a hidden clearing, surrounded by ancient cypress trees, small fires dotted the water's edge. Their flames reflected on the dark surface, creating dancing patterns that seemed to hold secrets of the day's violence. Malik sat nestled against Zora's chest, his small fingers playing with a loose thread on her sleeve. The terror had finally left his eyes, replaced by an exhausted calm. Around them, the other survivors, those they had freed during their raids, moved quietly, tending to wounds and sharing whispered conversations. "Mama," Malik murmured, his voice barely louder than the crackling fire. "I had dreams about you. Dreams about being free." Zora tightened her arms around him, pressing her lips to the top of his head. "Tell me about these dreams, little one." "We were walking in sunshine," he said, his eyes growing heavy. "No chains, no mean men watching. Just walking and laughing." Tears slid down Zora's cheeks, but her voice remained steady. "That's not just a dream anymore. That's our life now." A nearby Leora lay on a bed of moss, her face tight, with pain despite the herbs they'd used to dull it. Adira carefully checked the bandages on her side, frowning at the spots of red seeping through. "Stop fussing," Leora grumbled, though without her usual fire. "I told you I'm not dying from some slave catcher's lucky strike. You'll die from infection if you don't let me clean it properly." Adira replied, but her hands were gentle as she worked. The wound was deep but clean. If they could prevent fever, Leora would indeed survive. A woman named Malaya, one they'd freed 2 raids ago, approached with a steaming cup of bitter-smelling tea. "This will help with the pain," she said, helping Leora drink. My grandmother taught me about healing herbs before they sold her away. More survivors gathered around their fire as the night deepened. Some bore fresh wounds from the day's battle. Others carried older scars from years of bondage. All of them watched the three women with a mixture of awe and gratitude. What happens now? Someone asked softly. Where do we go from here? Adira looked up from tending Leora's wound. North, she said firmly. Once Leora can travel. There are people who can help us cross to free territory. Murmurs rippled through the group. Some nodded in agreement, while others looked uncertain. Why leave? A young man asked. We know these swamps better than any white man. We could stay, free more of our people. He's right. Another voice added. Stories are already spreading. They say you women can't be killed. Say your spirits of vengeance come to punish the wicked. Leora laughed, then winced at the pain it caused. We bleed same as anyone. Today proved that clear enough. But we survived, Zora said quietly, still holding Malik. We survived everything they did to us in that breeding house. Survived their whips and chains. Survived their hunters in these swamps. Her voice grew stronger. We didn't just survive. We fought back. The flames cast shifting shadows across their faces as they remembered the horror of the breeding farm, where their bodies were used like livestock. Remembered the night. They burned it all down, turning their pain into righteous fury. They thought they could breed us like animals. Adira said, her usual calculating tone tinged with bitter triumph. Instead, we birthed their nightmare. We birthed rebellion. Voices rose in agreement, sharing their own stories of resistance. One woman had poisoned her master's food. Another had helped runners navigate the swamp paths. Each small act of defiance had led to this moment. Former slaves gathering as free people, planning their own futures. Malaya tended the fire, adding dry wood carefully. They'll tell stories about you three, she said. The fire women who brought judgment, who showed us we could fight back. Stories don't feed hungry bellies, Leora muttered, but there was pride in her voice. Don't stop bullets either. No, Adira agreed. But they give hope. Hope keeps people fighting. She looked around the circle of faces. Whether you choose to head north or stay here, that hope is your weapon now. Use it wisely. The night wore on. People drifted to sleep in small groups, always with someone keeping watch. Malik had long since dozed off in Zora's arms, his face peaceful for the first time since his rescue. Zora hummed softly, an old lie her own mother had sung. The melody carried memories of comfort, of love that survived even the worst cruelties. Other voices joined quietly, creating a harmony that seemed to rise with the smoke toward the stars. As the eastern sky began to lighten, those heading north made ready to travel. Leora insisted she could walk, though Adira and Zora positioned themselves to support her if needed. Their few possessions were quickly gathered. Weapons, food, medicine for Leora's wound. The survivors embraced, exchanging whispered blessings and promises to remember. Those staying behind would continue the work of resistance, while those leaving would carry stories of the fire, women to distant places. Mist rose from the water as dawn approached, turning the swamp into a dreamlike landscape. The three women stood together, Malik still sleeping against Zora's shoulder. They had entered these swamps as fugitives, desperate and afraid. They left as legends, their very existence a challenge to the system that had tried to own them. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.